In this video, I'll show you how you can create an X bar chart and an S chart by hand using this small data set. So the following is a small example of a quantitative process. In this example, we want to calculate the subgroup means and standard deviations, then plot the means and calculate the upper and lower control limits for the X bar chart and S chart. So typically I would suggest that you always use software to do this because it can get really tedious. However, just to kind of show you the inner workings, basically what the software does behind the scenes, we're going to do one of these examples by hand. Here we can see that we have 5 subgroups where each subgroup has 4 measurements. And so the first thing that we need to do is we need to take the subgroup averages. So here this is just taking the average of these 4 elements for each one of these subgroups. So the first subgroup means, so we can call these means. If we take the average between 2.3 plus 2.2, 2.4, and 2.3, we get an average value of 2.3 for this first group. Now we do the same thing for the second subgroup, 2.1 plus 2.2 plus 2.3 plus 2.4. This gives us an average of 2.25. Keep taking the averages. We get 2.1, 2.15, and lastly 2.325. So now we've taken all the individual subgroup means. Now we need to take the standard deviations. So each standard deviation for each subgroup. Now the standard deviations can be calculated by simply just taking each observation, subtracting off the mean, squaring it, plus the next deviation, 2.2 minus 2.3, square this, all the deviations till we get to the last deviation, 2.3 minus 2.3, square this, add these all up, divide by 4 minus 1, so 3, take the square root, and this will be the standard deviation for each subgroup. So this is just the general standard deviation calculation, if you recall. Each observation minus its mean, so 2.3 minus its mean, square it, add them all up, divide by the n minus 1, then take the square root, and you have each of your sample standard deviations. So for this one comes out to be 0.082. The second subgroup has a standard deviation of 0.129, the third of 0.082, the fourth 0.129, and lastly 0.171. All right, so now we have our subgroup standard deviations and we have our subgroup means. In order for us to calculate the lower and upper control limits for each of our charts, we need to calculate X bar. This is going to be the average of each one of the subgroup means. So we sum all these and divide by the number of them, so 5. So add these up, divide by 5, we get a total subgroup mean of 2.225. That's the grand average. And if we take the average of the subgroup standard deviations, so this is going to be S bar, add these up, divide by 5, will be equal to 0.118. All right, so now we can calculate the lower and upper control limits for the X bar chart and S chart. Let's start with the S chart. So the lower and upper control limits for the standard deviation are S bar plus or minus 3 times S bar times then a factor which will allow our estimate to be unbiased. So the square root of 1 minus a sub n squared over a sub n. So what is a sub n? This basically is just a factor that will make it so our estimate for S bar, so sigma bar, the average of our standard deviations, will be unbiased. So here you don't need to worry about that too much other than just making sure that you obtain the right a sub n. Now there's a calculation for this, but I suggest that you use the table that I've provided in the notes as a sub n. So n in this example is equal to 4. That is the number of observations in each subgroup, so that's 4. That means that our a sub n value is going to be 0.921. And now we can use that in the S bar upper and lower control limit calculations. So S bar is equal to 0.118, so plus or minus 3 times 0.118 times the square root of 1 minus a sub n, which is 0.921 squared, all divided by 0.921 a sub n, and this means that we will get a 0.118 plus or minus this whole quantity measures to be 0.1497, which means that our lower limit will be equal to negative 0.0317, and the upper limit is equal to 0.2677. Now, something about this that we need to keep track of is that we recall that it doesn't make sense to have a lower limit that's negative for a standard deviation, so this is just going to be 0 instead of negative 0.0317. All right, so let's leave that there for just a second, and let's calculate the x limits. So for the upper and lower control limits for the x bar chart, we know that this is equal to x bar bar, that's the average of the subgroup means, plus or minus 3 times s bar divided by a sub n times the square root of your subgroup sample sizes. So this is then equal to x bar bar, which comes out to be 2.225 plus or minus 3 times 0.118 divided by a sub n, which we know from over here is equal to 0.921. That doesn't change. 0.921 times the square root of 4. Altogether, this gives us 2.225 plus or minus 0.192. And so we get a lower limit of 2.0. Go back to this. Lower limit of 2.0328 and an upper limit for the x bar chart, for x bar, of 2.417. Okay, now I recommend that you do this in software. Basically, now you need to plot the charts, the points on a plot. So if we kind of just practice this, this could be our S bar chart. We would start at 0 and we can go up to 0.28 or something, basically, so we can get all the points and our limits in. And we can put in a couple tick marks. And here what we want to do is we want to first put in S bar. So if we look at this, let's say each one of these is about 0.02, and I'm just kind of making this up as I go. You don't need to, it's not specifically has to be 0.02. I've just come up with a way that I can basically split up my tick marks evenly. So this is 0.2, 0.4, 0.06, then we have 0.10, and so on up. So the thing is that why I care about that is that my S bar chart has an S bar value of about right here. Now it's going to be a slightly lopsided, remember, because your lower limit was actually a negative value. So these two differences between the upper and lower area might be a little unbalanced. That's okay. This is equal to 0.118. That's our S bar level. Now our lower limit, again, is going to be equal to 0, and our upper limit for the S bar chart was equal to 2.2677, so it's going to be right about here, 0.2677, and now we have 5 subgroup standard deviations that we need to plug in. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This represents our subgroup. values, and so our first subgroup standard deviation was 0.082. We can see that up here, and so if we wanted to plot that, it would be somewhere about right here. The next subgroup standard deviation was 0.129, so that's going to be somewhere approximately right here. The next one was 0.082 again, so it'll go about right here. The next one was 0.129 again. And lastly, for the fifth one, it was 0.171. So that's going to be up a little bit higher. Let's see, that'd be 0.14, 0.16. So right about here. And ultimately, if we draw a line through, we have our control chart. Basically, it looks like all of our standard deviations are within the control limit, so the S-bar chart is in control. All right, great. Now let's do the X-bar chart. So draw our chart. Here we have a lower limit of 2.03. So I'm going to put my lower bound at about 1.9. And then I'm going to go up about a 0.1 distance. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. All right, so this would be 2.0, 2.1, 2.2, 2.3, 2.4, 2.5, 2.6, 2.7, and 2.8. So perhaps maybe I don't need all those tick marks, but again, just kind of eyeballing it where you should put these values. So the next thing that we need to put in is we need to put in our X-bar bar, which is our overall mean. So X-bar bar was equal to 2.225. This is going to be the center of our plot. So X bar bar is equal to 2.225. Our lower limit was 2.0328, so that's going to be right here. LCL is equal to 2.0328. Our upper control limit was 2.417, so that's going to be somewhere up here. 2.417, and again we have 5 subgroups, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Try to get them as even as possible, but you're just kind of eyeballing it. So this is the X bar chart. And lastly, this is then we need to plug in the individual group means. So up here, if we look, we have 2.3, 2.25, and so on. We need to plot those. So the first subgroup mean for the group was 2.3, so that's going to be right about here. The next one was 2.25, so that's about right here. For subgroup 3, that was about 2.1, so that'll be right about here. For subgroup 4, that was 2.15, so a little bit higher at here. And lastly, for subgroup 5, that's 2.325, so it's going to be a little bit higher than the rest of them at about right here. So draw in some lines to connect them. And we can see that, again, it looks like we're within our control limit. So the X-bar chart is in control. And so we're good to go. All right, and that's how we would calculate and do these by hand, basically constructing the X-bar and S-bar chart for a small data set. Now again, I highly recommend that you use software to do this, but it's good to know what software is doing behind the scenes. All right.